Color is one of the most powerful and effective ways of visually communicating who you are and what you stand for. And honestly, choosing a color palette doesn't have to be overwhelming or difficult. You don't have to be an artist to get those colors to look good together. Today, I'm going to show you how to strategically create beautiful brand or design color palettes in Canva and using a couple of other tools that I'm going to share with you. And I'm going to show you an example of how I've done that for a recent client. Hi folks, if we haven't met before, my name is Wayne. I am a creative director and a brand designer, and I help coaches and creators to up-level their visuals and design. If we have met before, welcome back to the channel. Now, before we go any further, I wanted to ask you a favor. If you do find this video helpful, please would you like and subscribe and hit the little bell button down below. And if you know anyone who you think would be interested in this or find it useful, please share with them. I would really appreciate it, and it does make a huge difference to small creators like myself. Also, I have a mailing list for a weekly newsletter called Meaningful Creations that goes out talking about design and tools and tips for good design. I would really appreciate it if you would sign up in that. The link is below or on the screen right now. So first, I just wanted to go over a couple of concepts that you'll see people talk about a lot connected with color palettes. The first is color theory. Now, color theory is essentially a combination of art and science that's used to determine which colors look good together and work well visually, with the overall objective being color harmony and effectiveness. But colors can also have a real impact on our moods, our emotions, and even our behaviors. And so color psychology is more concerned with choosing colors or using colors based on those effects. Color psychology is, of course, the basis for all of those lists you see online that tell you what colors mean. Now, most of those lists are very generic, and although they're obviously founded in psychology, there is a caveat to that. They're great to use as a starting point, but please remember that color associations and meanings vary massively, not just personally based on your experience, but also from region to region, from culture to culture, and even religiously. And as we've discovered in the last sort of 10-15 years especially, color associations change very quickly based on generation or what age you are. So bear that in mind when you're using these kind of generic meanings as a starting point. To me, the most important thing is finding colors that work well together, a combination, a palette, rather than choosing one particular color because of its meaning. And I think, controversial I know, but the best way to do that is to think about what you want, what you're trying to get across, and what works for your audience. So we're going to go through basically a 4-step process, and I'm going to show you how I do this with my clients, and we're going to talk about how best for you to do this when you need to create a brand or design color palette. And if you need to go through this process or refer to anything that we've talked about today, in the description below this video or on the screen right now, there is a link where you can go to and download a free PDF that has a bit of a workbook with worksheets and checklists for you to be able to go through this process, and also a couple of ready-made brand palettes, which I have done to help you kind of kickstart any of your branding or design projects. So before we even hit step 1, I wanted to give you a bit of a pro tip. And that's just have fun with this. Colors and deciding on colors can be fun. So with my clients, when we go through these kind of branding exercises, I always suggest that you put some proper time aside, not just 5 or 10 minutes. Get yourself a glass of wine, if you like a glass of wine like I do. Put some music on, light a candle, and just make it a fun and enjoyable experience to actually spend the time going through this. So step 1 in the process is essentially to get real clarity on what you're trying to get across. So to do this, what we do is we ask ourselves a few questions. And the first is, what are you trying to communicate? What is your message that you want to get across with this color palette, these materials? The next is, how do you want your audience to feel? Once they've had an interaction with your brand or with this design, what's the feeling you want them to get from it? What's the feeling they get when they first see it, and what do you want them to be left with? Do you want them to feel motivated and energized to go out and take action, or do you want them to feel calmed and relaxed and supported? These things make a big difference in the colors that we choose, so think about how you want them to feel in their interaction with your brand. Of course, it's also important to think about what you stand for. What are your brand values? How does that translate to your imagery? And then there are a couple of really practical questions that I think are important to consider. And a lot of brand designers, I think, really forget to ask these kind of things when doing a branding project like this. And the first is, are there any existing colors that you need to incorporate into this color palette? For example, if you have products that already exist that are a certain color or have a certain color, you want a palette that complements that so that it doesn't make it more difficult for you to create consistent materials going forward. The second question is, do you have existing photography or imagery that you want to keep using? For a lot of my clients, I work on creating and planning and designing an entire photo shoot for them for brand images. And they get a library of 1,000 images, which they want to use for years. They don't want new products or new branding or even amending of their branding to mean that all of those photographs that they've invested a lot of money and time into are no longer usable. So make your life easy. Think about whether there are things like that that you can take a prompt from, or maybe just pick up on one of the colors in those photographs that you can then incorporate into this new color palette. And the last thing, of course, is to consider your audience. This is just about knowing your audience, doing a bit of research, and thinking about how this color will come across to them, what this color means to this audience. And again, that will vary depending on age and region and all number of other things. But definitely think about that as one of these questions before we go any further in the process. So step 2 in the process is for us to do some mood words. So this is basically just where you write a list of all the words that have come from those questions we've just asked and that you want people to feel or you want to communicate. Write as many of them down as you can think of, things that represent your brand or you want to represent your brand, and the way that you want people to feel when interacting with any of your brand touchpoints. Once you've got that whole list, you're going to go through and refine it to between 4 and 8 words. That's just what I do with my clients. There is no set perfect number for this. If there are words that are very similar on that list, think about which of those words connect to what makes you special or unique or your business unique. Most importantly, think about whether there's anything missing. Is there anything that's really important to you to communicate through your brand materials that's missing from this list? And lastly, notice if there are any overarching themes. It's very difficult to find colors that can trigger all emotions, so think about which themes are prominent in what you want to communicate and how you want people to feel. Don't try and do everything, because that's when you end up with a color palette that just doesn't work. Now, I mentioned we were going to have a look at how I did this for one of my clients. So my client is a psychologist who does business and personal coaching and counseling, and he wanted a rebrand that really felt like his business now, which was something that's kind of grown and elevated in the last few years. We went through our questions and talked about what he wanted to communicate and how he wanted people to feel in interacting with his brand, and we then whittled down those words to his 8 key mood words that we're going to use for creating his color palette. Now, the words that we came up with were earthy, calm, alchemical, because we liked this idea of finding the gold in amongst all the other things that we go through. Natural was important to him, warm, timeless, clean, and then he really wanted something that felt like a combination of East and West modalities, because that's what he does in his work. So for step 3, we're going to start finding some visuals. Now, you can do this using your preferred tool, either an image library, or you could even just do it using Pinterest. I use a stock image library, which is actually free for personal or commercial use for most of my starting points, and it's called Unsplash. I'll put a link in the description below the video. Obviously, there are loads of stock libraries, but Unsplash for me has the biggest proportion of professional photographers who contribute to it, and so the quality tends to be a little better than a lot of the stock image libraries that are open to anyone contributing their photographs. But see what works for you, and of course Canva has a brilliant image library which has a lot of beautiful images in it. Searching for stock images can be a bit time consuming, and that's why I say just make this a process that you can enjoy and have a bit of fun with. Finding the right keywords or the right search terms are really important, and you'll get better results if you're searching for how something feels than specifically a topic. Try and stay away from images that are literal interpretations of the word. So if you're searching for the word business, stay away from images that have people in business suits shaking hands and just office buildings. Those will give you color palettes that are all very typical and won't really convey your personality. Think about more the feeling of it. Is it a feeling of power or confidence? Is it a feeling of being free or a feeling of being able to make decisions for yourself? All of these things are likely to give you better prompts for searching photography. Of course, another great way to do it is to look at what similar brands or brands that you admire are doing. What are the color palettes they're using? If it's a similar audience to you and they're doing well, you can get a vibe for what works with that audience if you really are stuck. But most of the time, I just look back at those words that we decided on and I try and get that feeling in an image. Now, there's no right number for how many images you can get, but it doesn't help to have hundreds and hundreds because that sometimes just makes it more difficult because there's more choice. So in that client example that I talked about earlier, we created a mood board based on those mood words and incorporated a couple of textures and then some photography that I found through stock image libraries. And this is the mood board that we came up with. As you can see, we've tried to tie in that kind of earthy feel, but there's still a lot of neutrals to keep it clean and fresh and have that kind of timeless feel. And I incorporated a couple of images that had that feel of sort of Asian or Chinese influences, but in a very earthy way. And then I incorporated a couple of images that felt very Nordic in their feel, very Scandinavian, because he's based in Copenhagen. So this was our color and brand image board that we started working from to create the color palette for his brand. And that's what we're going to do now. For step 4, we're going to create the color palette from your images. Now, ideally, you want to pick 1 or 2 images, but you could, of course, upload the whole mood board and pick images from that. And I'm going to show you how we do that now. A couple of things I did want to mention first. And one of those is that there is no perfect number of colors in a color palette, no matter what anyone tells you. Just looking for something as simple as a dark color, a light color, and an accent color can be incredibly effective and really all you need. I'm going to show you how to select a range of colors to just give you a bit more variety, but there is no perfect or ideal number of colors, no matter what anyone tells you. The second thing is that when you're exploring color, you'll see lots of references and lots of terminology and lots of acronyms. You really don't need to know them all. Unless it particularly interests you and you want to discover what they're about and learn a bit more, then of course go ahead. But we're just going to focus on that one thing that is the most useful for us when we're creating things in Canva and other online tools, and I'm going to show you what that is. If you go to canva.com/colors, you'll find this page which presents us with a few Canva tools that are really helpful when looking for or deciding on color palettes. Now, on the right-hand side, there's a color meaning section where you can literally go and explore some colors and what the traditional meanings are of those. And it also links to the color palette ideas, which just has loads and loads of 4 color palettes. That just makes it easy for you to choose a color palette that already exists. We're going to want to get one from our mood board because that's more strategic for our business. And so we're going to start with this tool called the Color Palette Generator. Now, when you click on that, you're going to go to a page that essentially allows you to upload a photograph and choose colors from the photograph. In fact, it will automatically pick up 4 colors from your photograph. So here you can see they've got a demo image and it's picked up 4 of the colors that are in this photograph. So what I'm going to do is upload the mood board from that client example that I showed you. Once that's uploaded, you'll see that the color generator actually picks 4 colors from within those images or within that image that I upload. And it's going to then show me at the bottom what they are, along with the only value that we really have to worry about when we're working with Canva and online tools, which is this alphanumeric value at the bottom here, which starts with a hashtag. And that's known as the hex value. And that's pretty much the only one that you need to know when we're going to be using colors in Canva. So you'll see it's picked these 4 colors and I can click on any of them and copy that hex reference to my clipboard. But I want to refine them a little more, and there's a couple of ways that we can do that. So this color on the right hand side, I'd like to be a little more of a golden color. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to go back to the Canva tools page and I'm going to go into the color wheel. Now you may have seen the color wheel before. People use it on lots of different tools and it allows you to pick colors from this wheel of all the possible colors. Now when you land on this, you'll see that it presents you with a box where you can paste in a color to start from, and then it's got a range of color combinations you can choose from. Now again, you don't really need to know what all of these mean unless it particularly interests you, but it just gives you a different way of selecting color palettes based on different formats or formulas of color theory. So complementary means that they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, monochromatic means that it's just one color and different shades of it, etc. So you can play with these as you like. So what I'm going to do is paste in the hex value that I just copied for that golden color, which we extracted from my brand board or mood board. And then what I'm going to do is just use this little circle that's on the color wheel and this slider, which has this white handle here that you can drag up and down. And I'm going to adjust those until it's more of a color that is in line with what I want. So I want something a little golden and a little brighter. And there you go. So this color on the left is the color that I want to use as the basis for my color palette. So I can then click on that to copy it, or I can click on these little slider icons here and adjust it a little more. And you'll see that it actually reflects in the background of this page, which is great because it gives you an idea of what it looks like in a bigger area rather than just in a little block. So once I've copied that hex value or color reference, I can then go into my Canva, into one of the documents that I have open or one of the designs I have open, and here I've just put a couple of empty shapes onto the page. If I click on a shape, I can then go to the top here to the color square, click on that, and I can then click on the plus to add a new color. I can then just paste in that hex value of the color I just chose, and you'll see it'll be reflected in that shape as well as added to the document colors. I can then go back into that color palette and I can copy in any of these colors that I want to use, and obviously I can first refine them or change them to be a little more in line with what I want them to be, and then again just copy and paste those references into Canva, and immediately that becomes usable as part of a color palette in that document. Now, if you are in a Canva free account, you can just do these and have them as colors in the document. If you're on a Canva Pro or Teams account, you can of course create a brand kit with these colors. Using the new brand hub, you can have as many brand kits as you like, and it just means you can easily refer to or reference the colors for your brand color palette really quickly and easily. If you would like to try that out, there is a link in the description of this video, and you can go and try a Canva Pro account for 30 days for free and try that out and see how it works. It can be really useful when you know you're going to use the same color palettes over and over for your materials. We're going to look at another way that we can extract colors from images just using Canva's main dashboard. So on this next slide, I've put in that brand mood board that we created that we've already seen. On the left-hand side, I've just put in some shapes, some circles that have a solid gray fill. Now, to extract the colors from this image, what we can do is just click on that shape, click on the color, and then when you go to add a new color, you'll see that there is a color picker. If you use that, you can then just hover over anything on this image that you've imported into Canva, and it will automatically pick up the color from the center of that circle. So I'm going to click on that green, and you'll see it automatically places it there and into the document colors. If I go to the next shape and again add color, I can then use the color picker and pick up a red color that I want to use in my document. And I can then just continue to do this until I have all of the colors that I want to use in my document, including different neutrals, and that's all then ready to go. And I can save them as a color palette if I have a Canva Pro or Teams account. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention briefly is that there really is, again, no particular rule for what percentage of which color you should use the most in your designs. That depends on the design as well as the feel that you're trying to get across. So for example, for this client, I wanted to use mainly neutrals for the materials that we were creating with just pops of color. I wanted it to be very calming and very clean. And so you can see here, I have separated this into basically proportions of colors that would be used. And we've got a light neutral, which will be the majority of the color, a primary color, which we've used a lot in images, a secondary color, which again comes through in images, the accent color, which is used for buttons and calls to action, and then a dark neutral. So now you know how to do this quickly and easily in Canva. And I'm going to show you a couple of other tools, online tools that you can use to do basically the same thing and work very similar to Canva's color wheel and palette generator. The first of those tools is this tool called Coolors. Now if you go to coolors.co, which I'll link in the description of this video, you can click on this button that says Start the Generator, or you can explore a range of palettes, very much like you can in the Canva tool. If you start the generator, it brings up these 5 colors as a starting point for you to create a color palette. These big numbers down here are the hex values that we've talked about before, and if you click on that, you can then paste in a hex value which you have extracted from an image like we did before. Then you can just click on this little padlock which locks that color, and then if you hit the space bar, it will then cycle through colors in the other 4 places that go with the color you've pasted in. And you can just narrow it down this way to find perfect colors that all match each other, and then export that or click and copy the hex values into Canva like we did with Canva's own tool. A couple of other nice things about Coolors is that you can again upload an image, so just like we did with the Canva tool. And also when you have one of these colors, if you wanted to create a monochromatic or simple color palette, you can click on this little View Shades button and it will actually show you the whole range of shades of the color that you have chosen to use as your base or starting color for that panel. The second tool I wanted to show you is actually Adobe's version of the color wheel. Now when you come to color.adobe.com, it will give you an option to again scroll through a number of different color harmony rules and create colors based on that. You can click and drag these little buttons just like you could in the color wheel of Canva. It's just more of a complex tool that allows a little more variation and a little more fine tuning. However, there is also the ability to extract color themes from photographs like in the other 2 tools we've looked at. If you go on the top here to extract theme, you can upload an image. And the really nice thing about this is not only does it select the colors for you, but you can actually move these little circles around to fine-tune the color without having to go into a different tool. So this is a really useful tool, and I have to admit I use this very often with creating color palettes. It's just easy to refine and easy to pick colors from, and gives me a lot of variation and a lot of flexibility. And then the last tool that I wanted to show you is a very simple tool called mycolor.space or ColorSpace. And this allows you to once again just paste in a hex value that you've copied from anywhere else and then click Generate. And what it will do is create a range of color palettes based on different color rules. And it's a great starting point to use just one key color as your starting point and find beautiful and interesting color palettes. And I will link to all of these tools in the description below this video. So before we wrap up, I wanted to show you how that color palette that we've just created, the example that I did with my client, would translate into actual materials that I've created for the client. And so this is what the client's website looks like, pulling in those colors, those images, and creating it based on those same mood words that we used to create the mood board and find images that gave us visual inspiration. As I said before, there are a lot of ways that you can choose color palettes, and the reason that I do it very often this way using images as the base is that just because of the way that my mind works, I'm very visual, and so finding visual inspiration that works for me is so much easier than getting inspired by just a little block of color on a page and not seeing how that applies to how it feels in an image or a design. So for me it works really well, but there are other ways to do it. And the last thing I wanted to say is, first of all, thank you for being here. I know this has been a bit of a long video, but I hope it's been helpful. And secondly, please remember that especially in the online space, it's very easy and quick for us to amend colors or to update colors. So don't get hung up on this and let it delay moving forward with your brand or your project. choose a color palette from that, and move forward, because you can always change things later. And in many ways, I really believe that a brand can and should evolve over time. So thanks again for being here, folks. I would really appreciate it if you would hit the like button and the subscribe button, and please sign up for my newsletter. And don't forget that all of the tools I've mentioned today are linked in the description, but the worksheets and checklists and some ready-made color palettes for you are available in a PDF download, which is also in the description below or on the screen right now. Thanks again for joining me, and have a lovely day.